Now let's talk about 210 and 211, which we've kind of touched on already, but let's get a little more specific on compartmentalization and the origins of that cell compartmentalization, or the origin of these various organelles in eukaryotic cells. And we haven't talked about prokaryotes and eukaryotes yet either, so let's do that right now. And you can see the pages here for that. So there are two main types of cells. We can break cells on planet Earth into two parts, prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Prokaryotes include the domain bacteria and archaeobacteria, or the Monerian kingdom, if you wanted to put them all together, but we generally split them into bacteria and archaeobacteria. Archaeobacteria are bacteria. They very much look like bacteria. They're prokaryotes, but there's differences in the cell wall chemistry that you don't need to know for AP biology, as far as I know. Just be aware that they are the more ancient version of bacteria or prokaryotes, and there's some differences mainly in the cell walls. Then you have eukaryotes, which have the kingdoms Protista, fungi, plantae, and animalia, which have all these membrane-bound organelles in them that we've been talking about. Okay. So prokaryotic cells literally means before the nucleus, or before the kernel, which would be I don't remember if it's Greek or Latin for nucleus. Prokaryotic cells possess genetic material, but it's not in a nucleus. It's not contained within a nucleus, just free floating around within there. They do have cytoplasm and cytosol in them, just like eukaryotic cells do. They do have a plasma membrane, which controls what goes in and out of them, necessary for life. They do have a cell wall, which provides a rigid outer structure, which helps to maintain their shape and provide some protection. They don't have any organelles other than the ribosome. Okay. And there are no membrane-bound organelles at all. They are smaller than eukaryotic cells. In fact, they are more in line with the size of the organelles in the eukaryotic cells, like the size of mitochondria and chloroplasts, for instance. They're more primitive because of that, since they don't have that as much compartmentalization. They don't have those specialized organelles. Their functions are a little more basic. And here we can see that in a prokaryotic cell. And this one happens to be a bacterium with a flagellum on them for movement, and cilia on the outside. These are pili, not cilia. Forgive me. On the outside, we can see the ribosomes inside. We can see the DNA all kind of messy. We can see this plasma or cell membrane. And then we have eukaryotic cells, which is what we've really been looking at and focusing on so far, or true kernels, or with a nucleus. They do possess a membrane-bound nucleus, which protects and contains their genetic material, DNA. And they also have other membrane-bound organelles with specialized structures and functions like mitochondria, chloroplasts, Golgi apparatus that we've been talking about. Because of that, they are more complex than prokaryotic cells. They have more compartmentalization. That's one of those key big ideas from this unit, separating things, allowing things to be more specialized. Many cellular functions within or different organelles in the endomembrane system, which we've talked about, can happen because of this. One thing we haven't talked about, which I just want to mention here, eukaryotic cells also have a cytoskeleton, which provides support and maintains cellular structure. In our book, they do talk about cytoskeleton, but from what I can tell, it's not one of the things we need to know for AP biology. So I encourage you to look at it. It's good stuff to know. I think it's useful. But as far as I can tell in AP biology, they're not going to test you on that. I hope I'm not wrong, but from what I can see, it doesn't look that way. So I'm not going to cover it in any detail here. All right, I want to take a little bit of a break and have a little discussion on compartmentalization. So here's the big ideas that come with compartmentalization. So there's two things down here. So the bottom two bullet points: membranes and membrane-bound organelles in eukaryotic cells compartmentalize intercellular metabolic processes and specific enzymatic reactions. The second one: these internal membranes facilitate cellular processes by minimizing competing interactions and by increasing surface areas where reactions occur. What I want you to pause now and think in your own brain, and then turn to an elbow partner or somebody in your group if you're sitting in groups. Where have we seen these two ideas below in cells so far? We've talked a lot about different cell organelles and things. Where have we seen these two ideas? And why is this compartmentalization important for cell function and efficiency and life. Okay. If you are watching this and you're not able to have that conversation, I do have some notes. If you download the PowerPoint, you can see some of my notes where I kind of talk about that a little bit in the notes below. But I would rather this be a free-flowing conversation within your group. After that, if we're able to, we'll get back together and talk about it in a large group as well. So why don't you pause the video here and do that. When you're done, come back and we'll talk about the next section. So here, just want to highlight the differences. Eukaryotic cell here, we can see that compartmentalization. We can see all the different cell structures where we can specialize and concentrate these different metabolic functions. Here's a plant cell, also a eukaryotic cell. And you can see here some of the differences between prokaryotes and eukaryotes. The DNA in prokaryotes is just kind of all over, but within eukaryotes, it's in the nucleus. In the size, prokaryotes are generally much smaller, whereas eukaryotes are much larger. Organization, there's not nearly as much organization within the cells of prokaryotes as there are within eukaryotic cells. In addition, prokaryotic cells are generally single-celled, whereas eukaryotic cells can be single-celled, but are quite often multicellular, like in plants and animals and fungus, and many fungus, and some protists. Metabolism, prokaryotes generally may not need oxygen to exist, whereas generally eukaryotes do need oxygen to exist because they're more complex. They have higher metabolic demands and energy demands. Prokaryotes don't have membrane-bound organelles, where eukaryotes do have membrane-bound organelles. Last thing I want to talk about in this unit, guys, is the origin of this compartmentalization, and specifically the origin of mitochondria and chloroplasts. The theory that tries to explain this, or that attempts to explain this, is called the endosymbiote theory, or endosymbiosis. Endo meaning bringing within, symbiosis meaning working together. Okay, so this proposes that eukaryotic organelles, like the mitochondria and the chloroplasts, evolve through a symbiotic relationship between what at one point were two separate prokaryotic organisms. The idea states that one cell engulfed a second cell that had, in the case of mitochondria, let's say, the ability to carry out cellular respiration, aerobic cellular respiration in particular, but also it could be anaerobic cellular respiration, but was very good at getting energy, very efficient at getting energy out of energy molecules like glucose. Okay, and so they developed this symbiotic relationship where the engulfing cell provided safety and nutrients and other processes to the cellular respiration mini organelle, proto-organelle organism within it, and that proto-organelle or proto-mitochondria was able to provide the cell with lots of ATP energy in a much more efficient way than that other cell was able to do on its own. So we got protection and providing of nutrients, and then we have more efficient use of those nutrients in terms of the mitochondria, and the two working together. Eventually, they both kind of evolved together over time to the point where they could not perform or not live on their own. They are necessary. It's a symbiotic, necessary relationship. Both mitochondria and chloroplasts were thought to have evolved this way as being separate organisms originally. Okay. What are some of the evidence that supports this? One, both mitochondria and chloroplasts, for instance, have two membranes. They both possess their own DNA. It's circular as opposed to in our chromosomes in our nucleus, and their own ribosomes, and they replicate on their own. Okay. One interesting thing in you, have you heard of mitochondrial DNA or mDNA? Mitochondrial DNA, that is only passed down from mother to child. Okay, all of your mitochondria in your body right now came from your mother. None of it came from your father. From your father, you got the DNA that was, half the DNA you have in your nucleus came from your dad, but none of the DNA in your mitochondria came from your dad. That all came from your mom. So technically, you could think of it as you are slightly more related genetically to your mother than your father because of that mitochondrial DNA. Okay? In addition, they're about the size of a prokaryotic cell, and they divide to a process similar to the way bacteria divide and reproduce. When you had that original fertilized, that original egg that your mother produced, it had mitochondria in there, along with her nuclear DNA. Your dad's sperm came in, it only injected chromosomal DNA from its nucleus, half of that, those two mixed, but all the mitochondria there, when that first egg cell divided, it took some mitochondria from that original egg into one of the new cells and some into the other new cell, so that both these new cells have mitochondria directly descended from your mother, which is pretty cool. So if you do a genetic analysis of mitochondrial DNA, you can actually trace maternal lineage through that, okay, which is pretty cool. And it doesn't mutate nearly as much as chromosomal DNA, which is also interesting. All right. These other organelles aren't listed in our AP curriculum as far as I can tell, but I wanted to include them. I'm not going to go over them in detail here, but just to take a quick look at them. We already talked a little bit about the cytoskeleton. Cilia, there on the surface of cells are subcellular structures that move things along the surface. And I've got kind of like at a concert, if you got beach balls, you move them along, you move a beach ball from one end of the concert to the other. Your arms would be like the cilia, and the beach ball would be like mucus that you're moving across the surfaces. But I'm not going to get into it more here in the video. You can take a look and watch this video if you want to later. The nucleus actually is not listed at this point in the unit for AP biology. You all know about the nucleus. It's got the gene-containing control center of the cell. It dictates the kinds and amounts of proteins to be synthesized, and by dictating that, it controls what happens in the cell. DNA in the nucleus controls the proteins control all the chemical reactions. And within the nucleus, you can also see there's a nucleolus in there, that little dark staining spot in the middle. And the nucleolus is what actually makes ribosomes, which then get exported out of the nucleus into the cytosol or to the rough ER. And that will do it, guys. I will see you later. Bye.